you're not placing your own will on the altar of God and saying, God, not my will, but yours be done. You're saying, my hand is the mighty hand of God. And that's where a lot of magic users do their thing, even in the real world occult practices. Hi, welcome back to Weatherford Daze. It's me, Jason, once again, along with my wife, Rachel, on the big comfy couch. I think that's actually trademark. Last week, we talked about one of the biggest subjects ever known to man, and that is space. And we had a little science fiction deep dive, that was so much fun. But Rachel had another idea of something that's kind of, would you say it's the opposite end of the spectrum from science fiction, or what would you?
I would say it goes hand in hand because most people that really enjoy science fiction also really enjoy fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that is kind of just fundamental to fantasy is magic. And it's kind of an interesting topic to me because it's there and yet it's also one of probably the most debated and controversial things for Christians. So we specifically wanted to talk about magic in Christians and just the whole fantasy trope, like where do people fall? And I don't know that there's necessarily, to me, any one like hard and fast right answer. I think that, there are some things in Christianity that are just, they're black and white. And you should, there's no
Wiggle. There's
debate, no wiggle room.
at all. Yeah.
And some people
No nuance.
feel like with magic that it is also a black and white issue. If you do, then you are probably going to hate this episode. So just put that out there right now. Because I tend to think that this is one of those that there's some nuance to, and there's some room for Christians to be able to look at magic in the fantasy world and to be able to enjoy. And actually, I believe that it can point towards Christ and towards God, towards the miraculous,
the Creator.
Right. So that's, my hot take. So we'll get into that. We're going to discuss that tonight. Today.
I think
we have such a hard time with that because we are recording at night, but then we release our episodes during the day. So we've been trying to be stay. But if you hear us saying tonight, that's why.
Tonight. So where I tend to land is similar to what Rachel is talking about. I'm also, not only do I read, but I also watch shows and things like that. There are some things I've read or shows that have portrayals of magic, and that's not the questionable thing about it. The questionable thing that I found was the way that the characters were portrayed or what their choices were, and that it wasn't the magical system that really was the big problem. It was honestly how do I put this, a mystical Swiss Army knife, of how to solve a particular problem. There's a story issue. We need to get from point A to point B, or we need to reverse time, or all different kind of things like that. The issues that I think a Christian would have with some of the stuff that I've, looked into is like, okay, some of the characters were not acting in ways in which I would consider something I would want to pattern my life after. Does that make sense? So the magic of it as part of the story system wasn't the questionable part.
I don't know that
wasn't
necessarily
the deal breaker.
What the answer is or what the problem is for most Christians. I think that for most Christians that take the hard and fast, no magic standpoint, which I don't think is the majority, but for most people it is just the Bible says don't have anything to do with witchcraft or sorcery. And so they go, okay, well, I'm not going to have, even have a book that has witchcraft or sorcery in it. And so then it becomes a matter of, are you okay with having magic in the world in any sense? Are you just going to not be okay with books that have, so-called witches or sorcerers? There are people that are against Harry Potter. Obviously, that was a huge one when
Yeah.
we were growing up. Harry Potter was a huge no for a lot of Christians for a long time. And then as it went on, a lot of Christians went, oh, well, maybe it's not that big a deal. And there are still some, I have very dear friends and family that are on both ends of that. I have some that are like, no Harry Potter, and I have some that are like, oh yeah, we love Harry Potter.
But is that really the hill that you want to die on with somebody? Like in in a
Yeah,
battle.
well, it's kind of one of those. I mean, for any book or movie, for anything that you bring into your home, for anything that for you or especially for your children, I think that as parents, we tend to become more careful about
Well,
what we bring
discerning
in,
and
more
discernment is
discerning,
a
right?
big part of this.
And I absolutely love that. I think that's the way that it should be. I think that anybody that enters into parenthood and just continues on it with their lives the same way that they have been, it's that to me is sad. I think that we all should, upon becoming parents, we should examine our lives and examine what we're bringing in and how we want to raise these precious little gifts that has given to us. So absolutely 100% think that that should be a point at which we examine and we stop and we go, hang on, is everything that I have been bringing into my house good? Is this what I want to introduce and how I want to raise my children?
And it's a big difference between having characters that are using magical means to accomplish certain tasks and having a book that goes ABC. Here's how you do witchcraft. That there's a huge difference because a lot of the fantastical magic systems they're only tangentially related to real world stuff. It's very tenuous at best. Most of the time, it's its own made up system, it's almost like a
And
mystical science.
I can understand, when somebody is going, when you look at Harry Potter, where it's very much based off of witches and wizards, and they're the good guys. Whereas you look at C.S. Lewis' Chronicles of Narnia, yes, there is a white witch in there, but she's the bad guy. It's presented as a very different thing. And what Aslan does, even though you might consider it being magic, it's not presented as it's a very different way of presenting
The
magic.
deep
The
magic
deep magic, right. So he's
before the foundations of Narnia, even it predates all that. It's
they do, I think there
ancient.
is a sorcerer that they talk about.
Koryakan,
Right.
maybe is he the
That is
one?
good.
Yeah,
In the Voyage of the Dawn Treader.
yes, he's got the big book or something and
Right.
had yeah.
So there is, and Lucy
They were
herself
tempted
does
by with the
a
spells.
spell. She does a spell. I mean, she's tempted by some of the spells, but she actually goes in there to perform a spell because she is a young girl, is the only one that can actually do the spell to make the little guys with the one foot
Yeah,
visible. Like
visible.
they've made themselves
The
invisible and they
monopod head pods, whatever the thing.
right.
Yeah,
That's but you have it really is it's interesting to me upon examining where people kind of draw the line of what magic is okay, what isn't okay. So, you kind of referenced earlier where I think that we both kind of fall. And that is that it's not so much about the magic and what's in the world, how the world building is done, as it is about what it glorifies. Are you presenting the use of magic and what is done with the magic as, does it uphold our value system? Is it using magic for good? Is it using magic for evil? As long as the worldview aligns with a Christian worldview, as far as the value systems are still in place, what is right and what is wrong, then I am okay with it. And that's where we've kind of fallen on that. Not saying that the use of magic in and of itself in a fantasy presentation is evil.
A lot of times people, especially parents or whatever, somebody that's real big into, no fantasy. And they may even be against J.R.R. Tolkien, creator of Lord of the Rings, or C.S. Lewis, creator of the Chronicles of Narnia. They take such a hardline stance on that they even cut out some of the amazing pillars of, I would say, Christian fiction. And you're losing out on that, and they have really good perspective on it. But I was looking up some Bible verses that people might quote, and it uses the word witchcraft, and it puts it together with idolatry, hatred, jealousy, selfish ambition, drunkenness, envy. So it considers the works of the flesh. This is actually, you can look this up. It's Galatians 5:19 through 21. Also, there's the one I think that says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," or something like that. I always used to make the joke while we were watching Harry Potter that, wizards too. But no, regardless, I think those are people really doing those actions. And watching a movie where you can have a conversation, or having somebody read a book where you can have a conversation about it and go, what did this character choose to do, and how was it reflective of our human nature of striving to put others above our own self. Those things those aspects we talked about in the hero episode, those aspects of a hero and how they are Christ connected. So rather than talking about that, which I think is really important, we get hung up on the details of, oh, they cast a spell or something like that. What do you think about that?
I do want to insert really
Yes,
quick.
yes.
It's very easy for us to say, oh, well, this is what we think is okay and everything, but we don't know where people have been and what their background is from. To somebody that has experienced real life,
like occult, real practices,
right,
they are very
or have
hard
had demonic activity or that type of thing, they're
oppression.
going to be much more sensitive to anything involving the occult or witchcraft, because to them it's there's less of a line between reality and fantasy. They've experienced those things in real life. I think that for someone, it's kind of, to the innocent all things are innocent. To those that have had their innocence stripped away, then that's a lot harder. So I don't know if that was exactly the
I was just thinking about something. If you had somebody over, let's say somebody older that might have been really in a real war situation. Let's keep it very recent. Let's say to like Afghanistan, Iraq, something like that. And you're about to watch a movie in the same room, and you didn't know he was coming over, he or she, and it's very evocative. It's very realistic. Now you were like, "Oh, that looks like a cool movie. It's going to be suspenseful and interesting. I love the actor in that," but they're getting triggered by that. So rather than be compassionate, you're just going to just watch the movie anyway. That's fine.
You don't go, oh,
Yeah.
it's just make believe, because to them it's more than just make believe.
That's what I was thinking about when you were talking about the occult thing. And what was it? What was the thing in it's in one of the writings of Paul where it's a food that was offered up before idols, and you just took the food away from it, and is it okay to eat? And he was saying something like, if it causes them to stumble, I'm not going to eat that. It's not.
Right.
I don't believe he's a sin, but not according to my belief. But if I were to eat it and they stumble,
right, you
then you're
have to
in at
follow
fault.
your own conscience with this, as with anything. There's a lot. It's kind of like, we were talking about the other day with Halloween. You have some Christians that are just like, I'm staying away from Halloween altogether. You have some Christians that are completely fine with, having the more innocent things of Halloween, the dressing up, the
Trunk or
children,
treat or fall festival, and
And then, there are some people that are just like, no, it's too much. It's too dark. I've seen too much darkness around Halloween. And, you know, then you've got the opposite side that are like, this, it's just a day. We're going to redeem that day. And we're going to make something that the enemy wants to take for evil, we're going to make it something good. And that's, it's funny because that's the same people a lot of times that stay away from Halloween, stay away from witchcraft and magic in books and movies and that type of thing. And it really is just what your level of sensitivity is. And for me, I am not going to say somebody is wrong that is doing something differently than what I have done for my children. But they may say that I'm doing something wrong. And, if that's the way they want to judge me, then okay,
Well, there's
I still like I love and I accept and I understand your viewpoint. And I also understand that, a lot of times when somebody is taking kind of a really hard and fast or more harsh viewpoint, that it's really hard to give grace to someone that is doing something you consider as wrong. And that's I don't really know what to do with that.
well in faith, especially in the Christian faith, I would say it's the butting of heads between orthodoxy and orthopraxy. Orthodoxy is like the doctrine,
Mhm.
and the praxis is the practice. And I honestly think that that's what that is it's more a practice thing than it is a doctrinal thing
Well, it's kind of,
for me.
when you feel a freedom in a certain area and somebody else doesn't, like it's wrong for you. It's, and I don't consider it wrong for me. How does anybody ever say what is absolutely wrong for me isn't wrong for everybody? When they are really convicted of that, that is a hard position to be in because you're going to then kind of feel like everybody else should feel the way that you do because you're so convicted about it. And being able to understand that someone else has stood before the same God that is telling you no, and they're getting a yes,
Yeah.
that's a hard thing to do. That has been something that has caused a lot of Christians to stumble. And that's not something that, a position that I ever want to put people in. So it's kind of one of those where it's like for Paul with the, meat sacrificed to idols, he's going, if I'm looking at this and saying, if I'm going to cause someone else to sin by my freedom, then I would rather restrict my freedom.
Yeah.
So, in that case, it's kind of one of those where it's like, if I would never ever want to bring up or push where I feel a freedom about magic and fantasy and fiction and books to a certain extent. And I don't go all the way. It's not just it's a free for all. Anything that has to do with magic or witchcraft, I'm fine with. That's like, we started watching Supernatural a long time ago. And that was one that I had to stop because I went, this is too much. I can't
Well,
watch
it wasn't just that it had monsters in it that they were because they were fighting and hunting them down and stopping them. The,
the level of the demons. I think was it.
well,
There was so
yeah,
much demonic. There was so much magic. There was so much evil
it's not
depicted in
just that,
there,
not just that. It
and
was
it
the
was
way that
fight after.
God is actually depicted in the show, and God is depicted. I don't know if you got to that point.
See, I didn't get to that
Okay.
point. That's the
Oh,
thing is
oh,
I
that was
know
my kind
because
of
of, yeah, I've heard
point.
spoilers about where the show went, but I had to stop even before that. Whereas the first couple of episodes I enjoyed, and I went, oh, well, this is kind of fun. It's people fighting bad guys. But
So with a little
it
bit of a
was
sense of
so
humor, but also
dark.
with the trauma these brothers go
Yeah.
through is insane. I mean,
And
even
it
people
was too
watching will tell
much
you
for
that.
me to watch.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I might be able to read a little bit more than I'm able to watch
Yeah.
as far as depictions of violence and of fighting against evil. I just, I still, there's a certain level of of violence and of darkness that I draw the line at. I can't go there. For me, it's too much. So even though I might be go, okay, I don't mind you watching that, but I also know that for me, I have that line that I just can't go across, or it starts affecting me, where I'm bringing in, or I'm partaking of too much dark.
Yeah.
And, I'm going, no, I need to balance that out. I need the light. I need the joy. I need the happy to be able to focus my mind on, because that's where I want to live. I want to live in the happy. So I would rather read something that has magic in it that is more suited for children. I want fantasy that's light and that's happy.
Well,
I'm fine with
fairy tales,
people.
as you
Yeah.
may have realized, Rachel likes fairy tale style stuff and retold fairy tales,
Mhm.
redone in new ways. I don't know.
But that's the thing, I'm looking for stuff that is clean. I'm looking for stuff that, no spice, no language. And a lot of times when you end up with books that are written from that perspective, you're ending up with people that are writing with a viewpoint that's very similar to mine. A lot of times you may not have a Christian book, but I can tell the writer was Christian because of the themes that they're presenting, because their higher power is pointing towards a creator, a being that is kind of working things out for good for these characters, that honors when people are brave and self-sacrificial, when they act on love, when they're kind to other people, all of these good things, that there's this magic and the fantastical in the world and in the world being, but it's based off a worldview that's similar to mine. And I think that, to me, that is more important in what books that I read myself and that I will allow my children to read, is that the worldview that is presented is a good worldview according to my faith, than anything thematic necessarily. It's like I will read a theme of just about anything as long as it is backing up my values, and it's presenting the world in a way that you've got actual good and actual evil, and you can tell the difference between the two. I don't like when books get morally muddy.
Yeah.
And when, you actually are sitting there looking at, from a the main character's perspective, and they're doing things that are wrong, and you're sitting there trying to justify
But
the
what
wrong
excuses do the
because you're living in their head.
what excuses do the characters use to justify? I was just thinking,
Right.
hey, I summoned these skeletons up for a good cause. I promise. Now that comes up sometimes in D&D games because you're playing a character that can make bad decisions, and sometimes making those bad decisions are really good moments for drama, but they're not great things to happen in a story where you kind of have where you don't know whether this character is going to have a coming to Jesus moment where they're going to realize that they are doing something wrong.
I like the point you're looking at.
Oh, okay, yeah, I was
I want to get to that.
okay. So I was looking up some of the stuff that I already knew. Some of these quotes that C.S. Lewis had, but I thought they were great. He actually converted from Christianity. Before he converted, he was really big into mythology, Greek and Norse myths. He was just really fascinated by it. And that kind of led him in a way. He had a quote where he says, "Myth is the isthmus which connects the peninsular world of thought with that vast continent we really belong to." There's some geography in there. I think what he's saying is that you look at this smaller landmass and it has a connection, and you find this giant continent of the gospel there. he was good friends with Tolkien, and he said that myths, he still liked myths. He said myths were like lies breathed through silver. And I thought that was just an amazing, that's a great way of putting it, because Tolkien and Lewis had these conversations where they came to the conclusion that the story of Christ was the only true myth. He says the story of Christ is simply a true myth, a myth working on us in the same way as the others, but with this tremendous difference that it really happened. That's the reason that you have people saying that Christ was based off of myths, when that's not what it is. The story of Jesus Christ is more than just a story, but it resonates on a mythic level with us. We have a son, the Son of God. We have miracles. We have resurrection from the dead. These are all some of those magical things you could even think about. Rachel was talking about magic and miracles. Not too much of a difference, except who is wielding it and when, and that kind of thing.
The concept of magic and miracles is really interesting to me because Lewis is saying that it connects myth and miracles, fighting against the atheistic viewpoint, right? When you introduce a child, I think, to magic, I I feel like it allows them to see beyond just the everyday mundane. And it allows, I think, for a child to be more open to the spiritual world. And it's funny because I think that I know some people, some atheists that would be like, how horrible you're, trying to manipulate your child's mind. Well, everybody tries to teach their children the way that they believe. I believe God is real. I want my children to believe that. I want them to know and experience God the way that I've experienced Him. And I don't feel like that's wrong. So, yeah. But to me, you know, when you when you teach a child, and you need to carefully, you need to teach them the difference between reality and this fictional world that's completely made up, where stuff can happen that doesn't happen in the real world. But then you also go, you know what, there is a truth here. Humans dream of magic because we know that there's something more in this world than just what we see. We know that there is an element and a power that is beyond. We know that there are miracles that happen in real life, things that we can't explain. And that's God. That is the spiritual realm, the unseen world. And
Powers and principalities, cosmic geography.
and we make up and we dream these fantasy worlds and all of these magical systems. There's so many different ways that magic can happen. But even looking at, like, in Star Wars, the Force, and how it's very much based off of a religious belief, the whole idea of the Force.
It's Taoism.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it's Taoism, and I think that George Lucas came up with that while he was in the hospital or something. I don't quote me on that, but I think it was about Taoism, and he was really big into that.
But the
And
idea
Eastern religions.
of your emotions, your ability to influence the world through this magic, but it's a force, and it's influenced by whether you're grounded, whether you're in tune with the world, whether you're, operating off of good emotions, or whether,
Fear,
fear,
anger,
hatred, all of those
suffering.
are, yeah, they're the dark side once you start down that path.
Forever it will dominate your destiny.
But there is truth behind it, which is why people, I feel like every false religion has these seeds, these nuggets of truth to them. And they all believe in kind of this extra, this ability for these unseen forces to influence our world. Even you go back to paganism, you go back to the Greeks and the Romans and their pantheon of gods. All of these beings had these emotions, and it was good or bad that influenced their ability to perform these
Right.
miraculous works. And
It was also cosmic soap opera,
hmm,
that too, because
yeah.
the gods acted like capricious mortals. I mean,
Hmm.
we have we're jealousy the way that not the way God is jealous, but a jealousy of of one another, and oh, they're getting more worship than I'm getting, and this very human way of thinking.
But you saw something different in Christianity. You saw a God who did not require that humans would go above and beyond for him. It was a God who went above and beyond for us.
Yeah,
He went, there's no way that you can do enough to redeem yourselves, so I will do it for you. He laid down his life to pay the price for our sin. And that is something that no other religious system other than Christianity has actually presented. But I
it's
find
all
it,
works. It's all like
mhm,
what you can do. There are even some adjacent Christian beliefs that are very works based. It's you have to accomplish. You have to be arbiter of your own salvation, and you can't do it. Only Christ can step in that gap,
but
intercession or intercede on our
circle
behalf.
back, have we fully kind of the whole idea of belief in magic, the ability to see miracles in real life, how that kind of counteracts this atheistic worldview where you're just only able to believe in what you can physically see, hear, and touch, versus the spiritual where you're believing that a God you can't see exists, that He is influencing reality in a way that is for our good.
One thing that I mentioned to you one time was an old phrase that they used for magicians was will workers,
Mm.
workers of will. And the question is, whose will is that? Oh, it's my own. It's my own. What was it in Willow where he said which one of these fingers is the most powerful one, and he was saying my finger. So you're supposed to point to the wizard's finger, which one was most powerful, and Willow Ufgood says my finger. So he's saying the power lies in me. So when I think about that, I thought of not my will, but yours be done. That's where the miracle comes into play. Working your will is saying, well, I don't like this situation that's happening. Here's what I want to happen. I want this person to fall in love with this person. I want the calamity to come to this person, riches to come to this one, healing to come to that one. You're not placing your own will on the altar of God and saying, God, not my will, but yours be done. If you do it, if you don't, yet will I still praise you. You're not taking a knee. You're not humbling yourself before the hand of a mighty God. You're saying, my hand is the mighty hand of God. And that's where a lot of magic users do their thing. Even in the real world occult practices, it's very me centered. And even those that summon up things, they're really saying, I'm the one in the driver's seat. And that's where it
So that's where you
kind of
go
butts
when
heads with
you,
miracles, I think,
yeah.
in a way.
So, and that's the thing, you can take and you can explain to a child, or you can, for yourself, and you can say, there's all of this. I'll read these fantasy and this magic tales where you have people that have the ability to influence the world. And then you go, but what is real? What is truth? How do we take and go from here to God? What's the difference? And that's the difference. There is the whole will. And even just going, anytime that you deal with magic, typically it's based off of us having the intelligence and the understanding to know what is the best way to do this. But for Christians, we go, I can pray and I can ask for God to do these things, but I also understand that I only have my own teeny tiny human perspective of
The
what I
keyhole. You're
want.
looking through a keyhole.
But God, I can trust that I may ask Him for something that is totally not the best thing, and He won't give it to me because it's not about what I ask for, it's about what He knows I need. He's not going to answer one of my prayers that isn't good for me to have answered. And that's the difference. If I had the ability to do magic, to actually, perform miracles or do this stuff on my own, what a mess this world would be if we humans had that power. We
Like
believe,
Bruce Almighty.
yeah,
That he learned that the hard way, that you
yeah.
can't grant everybody's prayers and everything turn out great.
But the
Yeah.
ability to actually affect the world and change things is in the hands of an omniscient God who knows. He's outside of time. He already knows where we're going,
What you need before you
what
even
we
ask it.
need, and He wants us to interact with Him. He wants us to ask Him for things because that grows our faith when we ask and He is able to answer it. But it also grows our faith when we ask and then we have to wait and we have to seek to understand why He doesn't answer right away or He tells us no. Because all of that time we're developing this relationship with Him, and He speaks to us and gives us this wisdom and this insight that comes from Him into how to ask, how to be in His will, how to have an understanding that's greater than just our own little perspective. He gives us these guidelines of saying, if you ask for something that's for your own selfish gain, then that's going to be a no. You need
You
to ask
ask
for
it in
things.
my name, in my nature. When you're in the Spirit, your desires are purified. When it says, give you the desires of your heart, it didn't say give you the desires of your flesh.
Mhm.
Give you the desires of your, your carnality. It says your desires of your heart. And if your heart is like a heart after God, then what happens is what you desire is subordinate to God and His way. And of course, your desire is going to be not just for yourself, but for others.
And He's very
And
clear that
very
it's
humbled.
not
Yeah.
about the stuff here on earth. He teaches us that you store up your treasures in heaven where moth and rust can't
Can't touch
corrupt.
them. Yeah.
And so if we're praying for the physical blessings rather than the spiritual blessings, there's sometimes he wants us to have our daily bread, that we are supposed to pray for our needs to be met, but we're not supposed to pray for over that. We're supposed to pray for our hearts to be changed, for our minds, for us to gain more understanding into who He is, for our relationship with Him to be developed. We're supposed to have an eternal mindset of what actually does matter in eternity versus what matters now.
Souls.
And that keeps
Yeah,
us
your
from
immortal
going, oh
soul goes to
God,
heaven.
please let me win the lottery, And
Because when you're gone, it's gone. And I was thinking, they always say you can't take it with you. There are some things you can take with you if you believe that those who you lead to the Holy Spirit helps use you as a vessel or instrument to lead someone to Christ. That is someone you will see again. in eternity.
Isn't it funny though?
That their body, may be in the grave, but
When you read a book that has magic in it, very, very rarely do you see those people with magical powers being willing to stockpile wealth. You see, or if they are doing it, it always turns to ruin. And that's the thing. I like when a book about magic actually shows those good values and good principles that, like, stockpiling wealth, being, operating out of greed rather than using your abilities and your giftings, whether they're magical or whatever, to help others, to spread this unselfish joy in the world. Like that is when you've got these books that are fantasy, that are magic, but they echo the real world. They echo how life actually is supposed to work, and it's those things I feel like that actually can teach us how to handle this whole prayer thing. The idea that we have the ability to talk to and connect to the creator of the world. We can learn from children's books how to handle that power, of these wrong hearted desires are going to lead us to destruction. When we have the right heart behind what we're wanting, it translates.
what was it you said about, what was the quote about dragons? I think it was a Lewis quote or something where he said, you know, children know from these books that dragons exist.
Actually,
No, these stories
that
show
one I
you.
think is G.K. Chesterton.
Oh, you're right. They
There's
show that
there's one by
they.
Lewis, but that one was
Okay.
G.K. Chesterton.
Show that dragons can be defeated.
Hmm.
So that's what his whole thing, what was pulling from. And these are very learned people of the faith, and yet I think that I was always, I always am interested in these stories, and there are some people who have a hard time with even things with superheroes, where we can look at those stories that people are trying to tell, these modern myths, and use them as lessons to talk to somebody else about it. How do you talk about Superman, Batman, and Iron Man, and kind of bring it back to Christ and go, check that out? Me and my friends, as I mentioned before, we're doing that for years, and we were pulling stuff from it. And if you had a hard line about those kind of movies or those kind of things, then for me, I felt like you were missing out. Now, I wasn't going to come to them and judge them and things like you were talking about earlier, because I feel like that's not what we need to do. We don't need to fight each other. There are forces of darkness in heavenly places that need to be fought against, and not that. We don't need to fight each other over something as silly as that. But I think that if you pull something from these books that makes you think, or makes you think, hey, there's a spiritual war going on around us, and you're kind of open to that because of the magic and the fantasy, then by all means,
You know what I love
get some
about
nuggets
God?
from that. A lot
Oh,
of stuff.
yeah.
A lot of stuff. Okay, what
But
specifically?
He meets us where we are.
Mm.
And that's something that, there's so many different ways that He speaks to us, so many different means that He speaks to us through. Whereas I may get a lot of inspiration and insight about God and how He works in this world and truth from fiction and about, fantasy and magic and all of this. Somebody else may get the same lessons from walking through a museum or listening to music. I feel like, God speaks to us in all aspects of
Or reading about
creation.
astronomy,
Yeah.
or genetics. I mean,
I feel like if there's something that somebody goes, yeah, no, this is just not it for me. I can't, there's too many hangups I have here for this. God will talk to him in some other way. Just because it's not the way that he's talking to me doesn't mean that he doesn't have the ability to. eh, I guess that was just what I was thinking about when you were, but I feel like in all of this, there is, when you talk about Christians and magic and what we should be okay with and what we shouldn't be okay with. There's very definitely some things as Christians that we should not be okay with. There are things that we should not bring into our houses or expose ourselves or our children to. And there's anything that touches on darkness that is manipulating or showing a manipulation of things in a way that is just focused on death or the demonic, that's automatically a taboo. But if it is handling magic in a way that is light and that is teaching good truths, then to me, that's
Or
okay.
reflective of your moral stance,
Right.
or at least a character that's got an arc where they're headed that way.
I don't think that a fairy godmother in a story is necessarily wrong just because she has a magic wand.
Right. What was it? I was also thinking about. Think it was Apostle Paul that said that not only do we have God's word, but we have all creation, so that you can just look at creation and look at how amazing that is, and have no without excuse. That that his thought was, you look at all that is, even just apart from God's word, and it leads you to God, because you're you're awestruck by the majesty of it. So in a way, you if it leads you back to God and the God of the Bible, it can't be all bad. Just use discernment. Use discernment. You have to measure it for yourself. You can't judge others for what they are pulling from. Me and Leia were watching The Matrix the other day, and I got so much from The Matrix back in the 2000s. As at least the first movie, but as far as spiritual content, and that's pretty magical.
And I guess to kind of wrap it up, we're not we're not trying to persuade anyone that our perspective is right. We're just kind of trying to start the conversation, have people think through wherever you end up, pray, seek God, and where you find a peace, awesome. Hopefully, you can be someone that is able to live at peace with other people that don't agree with you, because I think that that is important to a certain extent for Christians. There are some things that we should draw the line at, and there are other things that, maybe we should go, well, maybe that doesn't matter so much. We can choose to live at peace with other people, not argue necessarily, If you want to start an argument in the comment section, go for it. If you feel like that's what you're led to do. we we will we will accept that. But
Keep it civil.
yeah, please do.
Go ahead.
Remember, we're representing God to this world, and the way that we speak to and treat each other, I think, should be with love, um, even when we don't agree with each other. And we're just trying to work it out, just like everybody else is. We don't have all of the answers, and we're on a journey. Maybe, at some point in the future, we'll completely change our minds. We are open to having our minds changed. That's where we are on this journey so far. I don't know how to wrap that up.
How we wrap it up is, you have to teach me how to disapparate.
Oh,
How do we do that? Because I usually they say something like zippity doodah or whatever, and they are abracadabra and they disapparate. but I don't know how to do it.
I don't either. I'm sorry.
Well, we won't disapparate. We'll just disappear at the end of this video, and we'll be back next time. Talk about some more cool stuff. As you can see, we are constantly coming up with new ideas. If you have any suggestions, we're open to that too, and we want to talk about things that you're interested in. We'll see you next time. Have a magical week. Bye.